I began investigating when I heard the unbelievable story of a man who allegedly cooked his victims and sold them as barbecue sandwiches. But the truth is much more insane than I could have ever imagined. This is the case of Joe Metheny, and I hope I can shed some light on the crazy twist of events in this horrific case. Joseph Roy Metheny was born in Baltimore, Maryland, where he grew up and would go on to do his killings. The first known murder committed by Metheny was in 1994. His target was 39-year-old worker Kathy Ann Magaziner. Metheny claims he strangled her and later decapitated her after she died. Her body wouldn't be found until much later and had to be identified through dental records, as sickening as that sounds. In most cases of serial killing, there's a cool-down period between the first and second murders. His next murder didn't occur until a year later in 1995. Metheny claims that his following murders were spurred on by his girlfriend leaving him and taking his son. Of course, by this point, he'd already killed one woman, so he was probably looking for excuses. In fact, much later, Metheny gave the statement that he just killed people simply because he enjoyed it. He said, quote, "I got a rush out of it, got a high out of it. Call it what you want. I had no real excuse why other than I liked to do it. I don't understand why anyone would find joy in doing something like that." For that, let's have a deeper look at his personality and past. One thing that becomes apparent looking into this case is that Joe Metheny is an unreliable narrator of his own life story. Is he just a compulsive liar? Or has years of substance warped his perception of reality? In the years leading up to and during his murder, Metheny heavily used drugs and alcohol, which may be part of why a lot of the details he shared about his life are conflicting or just flat out wrong. Metheny claimed his mother, Jean, was dead for many years while she was still very much alive. He also claimed that his mother was neglectful of him growing up, often sending him away to live in foster homes. His mother disputes this as she was painstakingly working 3 jobs to try and support her family throughout Metheny's childhood. As if the inaccuracies haven't been absurd enough, Metheny also gave a false recount of his military service. Now, Metheny did join the army right after he turned 18 in 1973. However, Metheny claims he served a tour in Vietnam and that his addiction issues began while in the army. This is pretty much impossible, since by that point the United States had already withdrawn from Vietnam. According to his mother, he was actually stationed in Germany. Metheny got increasingly distant from his mother after his army service, and this is where his life began to take a downward turn. He probably developed a drug addiction around this time and fell into homelessness, living out of homeless camps around Baltimore's South Side. Despite his addiction, Metheny eventually began living in a trailer, had a son, and got a steady job working as a forklift operator for Joe Stein and Son Pallet Company. He also acted as something of a night watchman for the company since his trailer was located near the company's property. Remember this, his workplace is going to become very important later. His next 2 murders occurred beneath Baltimore's Hanover Street Bridge, where Metheny used an axe to murder 2 homeless men, Randall Brewer and Randy Piker. Metheny also claims he killed 3 more people that same night. First, he said he lured 2 sex workers under the bridge and killed them before killing a man fishing nearby who had witnessed the murders. He dumped these 3 victims into the river and their bodies were never found. So we have nothing but Metheny's own confession to go off of for this one. This murder spree eventually landed Metheny in jail, but in a surprising turn of events, he was acquitted. Coincidentally, a homeless man named Larry Amos had discovered Metheny's discarded axe and used it to murder another homeless man named Everett Dowell. Now it's during the next stretch of months that the most infamous acts committed by Metheny allegedly occurred. According to him, he lured in and killed several other workers. He then opened up a small street-side barbecue stand where he mixed and ground human meat with pork and sold it to the unsuspecting public. As horrifying as this story is, there's just one problem with it. It may not have happened at all. There's only one source for the story, Joe Metheny himself. He only claimed to have done this in a statement he gave a good 8 years after he was already in prison. The truth is, a lot of serial killers tend to lie for attention after they end up in prison. For example, 19th century serial killer H.H. Holmes claimed to have killed 27 people when in reality, police could only confirm 1 murder, but they suspected up to 9. In fact, several of the people who Holmes claimed to have killed turned out to have been alive. There's no proof of Joe Metheny having ever operated a barbecue stand, let alone having served human meat in it. Coverage of the case online tends to focus on these baseless claims though because, let's be honest, it's a morbidly fascinating idea, even if it may just be pure fiction. However, there is a less reported detail in the Metheny case that may be just as interesting. So let's continue, shall we? After being acquitted of Brewer and Piker, Metheny's next verifiable victim was a woman named Kimberly Spicer. She was a worker, and Metheny hid Spicer's body in the bushes near his trailer. After Spicer's murder, Metheny's next target was another worker named Rita Kemper. Kemper already knew Metheny, and the two of them had shared drugs together before. On December 8, 1996, Metheny made an attempt on Kemper's life after Kemper refused to have sex with him. She tried to flee but was dragged back into the trailer by Metheny. According to Kemper, at one point Metheny yelled, quote, "I'm going to kill you and bury you in the woods with the other girls." Now, fortunately, Kemper managed to escape from him, but despite that, she did not immediately go to the police. If I had to take a guess, it's probably because of the sad reality that police don't tend to take the claims of sex workers seriously. It's why a lot of serial killers tend to target these women. However, shortly after this incident, Metheny still got himself caught thanks to his own poor judgment. For some reason, Metheny asked a coworker of his named Clinton Ashbrook to help him dispose of the body of Kimberly Spicer. Now, this next part is where things get pretty weird. Ashbrook decides to report what Metheny said to his bosses, Joe Stein Sr. and Joe Stein Jr., but it turns out that Joe Stein & Son Pallet Company was not your ordinary business. It was really a front for organized criminal activity in the Baltimore area. In fact, Stein Sr. was something of a career criminal already. The pallet company was supposed to be his attempt at a legitimate business, but it too turned out to be a criminal front. Not only that, but it was actively under investigation by the FBI at the time. And guess who was an FBI informant? Stein's own son, Joe Stein Jr. While Metheny was never charged for his involvement in the pallet company, it's unlikely he was something of an enforcer for Stein Sr. It's also possible that Stein Sr. knew of or suspected Metheny's crimes as well. After all, Metheny's trailer was located very close to where he worked. Ashbrook also took what Metheny told him to the police. No doubt, Metheny's connection to the pallet company sped up the investigation into Stein Sr.'s criminal activity as well. On December 15, 1996, Joe Metheny and Joe Stein Sr. were both arrested after leaving a Christmas party. In the years following Metheny's arrest, he was charged with his assault on Rita Kemper as well as the deaths of Kathy Ann Magaziner and Kimberly Spicer. His defense attempted to go for an insanity plea, saying that his years of drug and alcohol destroyed his mind. However, this failed. Metheny received 50 years for assaulting Kemper, life for killing Magaziner, and the death penalty for killing Spicer. But 2 years later, in the year 2000, the death penalty was overturned. See, Maryland law states that the death penalty was only available for murders committed while committing another crime. In Metheny's case, they argued that the murder occurred while Metheny was trying to rob Kimberly Spicer. However, there was not enough evidence to prove that robbery was the motive. So instead, Metheny was given life in prison. From here, the only notable incidents involving Metheny are his confession about his so-called barbecue stand. And again, I personally don't think his barbecue stand ever existed. On August 7, 2017, Joe Metheny was found dead in his prison cell. He was 62 years old and likely died of natural causes. But even though Joe Metheny was the main topic here, he's not someone who deserves to be remembered. His victims instead should be the ones that people remember instead of the monster that ended their lives. When I began investigating the Joe Metheny case, I was prepared to read about a real-life Leatherface, but the truth of Metheny's connection to organized crime is something I was unprepared for. Of course, even if Metheny never made any human burgers, there are still very real cases of serial killers who really did things like that. Until next time, this has been Harrowing Stories, and remember to like and subscribe.